Hey, it's Derek from WatchMeCode.net. So I want to continue talking about functional JavaScript and the things that I'm learning about it, and continuing with currying specifically. Now, in the previous episode, I did talk about my little aha moment with currying and finally starting to figure out what it is. And shortly after that, there was some discussion in the WatchMeCode community Slack around currying, and somebody in the Slack had actually created their own generic currying function, a curry function, so to speak, that would allow them to pass in any function that they wanted and have it return a curried version of that function. Now, this is the kind of function that you would expect to find in a library like lodash or ramda or other libraries that support functional JavaScript, but it was interesting to me to see somebody else create their own. And that really got me intrigued. That made me want to know, okay, what would it take to actually build this on my own? Could I build this on my own? So I sat down and I tried and failed some more. And eventually I just went and looked at the one that this person had posted in the WatchMeCode Slack and, okay, that's how I do it. So I wanted to take a few minutes today and show you how you can build your own curry function to curry any function that you want in JavaScript. And I want to show you this because I find it incredibly useful to understand how these things work, to really see the implementation and the code that makes something like curry work in JavaScript. So let's get started. Let's dive into some code here. And I'm going to show you, first of all, the basic example that I had set up previously. Now, this is kind of an expanded version instead of using the shortened arrow syntax, but I've got this set up, and whenever I save this, it's going to run with nodemon on my command line that you see. So now I want to ultimately not manually curry this function like this, but rather have a curry function into which I can pass my add function. So I'm going to start by redefining a few things here. I'm going to change this to just add. This is going to take A and B, and it's just going to return the ultimate calculation of A plus B. So now I'm also going to say var curry equals require /curry, which you can see I have this curry file, but it's currently empty. So when I save this, I don't have a curry add right now, so we're going to get errors. Let's go add a curry add. We'll say var curry add equals curry add. So now we have what should ostensibly be a curried version of the add function. Of course, the curry function doesn't exist, so we're still getting errors. So let's go fill that in. Let's take this example and fill in the details on this. I'm going to start saying module.exports equals function, and this is going to take a function as a single parameter. Now, within this, remember the idea is to take any given function, the fn parameter, and return, first of all, a new function that only takes one parameter. So we're going to return function at this point, and that function is going to take a single parameter. Once we have that, things get a little bit tricky. I want to go back to my example code where I call this curry add right here. So the very first thing we're going to do is call curry and pass in the add function. And that is this call to the curry function. And in fact, I'm just going to name this, that way I can see it easier. That is going to return a new function that takes a single parameter, which is going to be assigned to the curry add variable. Now the curry add variable is going to take a single parameter, which we have defined here. And once we have that, we're going to return yet another function. Okay, so I need a third function in here potentially. So return function B. Once I have that, well, I can pretty much call it with the last parameter that we are going to pass in, the B parameter, at which point I can apply this function. So I can say function.apply, or let's do call in this case, call undefined A and B. That way I can list all of the arguments. And this technically should work. Undefined. Okay, I need to return function.call. There we go. So now I'm seeing 11, 12, and 13 as I expect, based on the sample code that I've created here. So I have 5 plus 6 is 11, plus 7 is 12, plus 8 is 13. Well, that's nice, but this really isn't very generic for any function call that we want. If I had a function with 3 arguments, or 4, or 5, it doesn't really scale out very well. So we need a way to scale this and do it differently than what we're currently doing here. So I'm going to change things up a little bit. Instead of creating these manual functions and doing that, well, what I want to do is pass an array of arguments into this function. And I'm going to retrieve that array by saying var args equals array.prototype.slice.call arguments. This is going to turn the arguments object into a proper array. And I'm going to kind of skip ahead to the end, because once I have this array of arguments, it's easy for me to see whether or not I should apply these arguments to the original function. And I do that just by checking the argument's length against the original function length. Now, the original function length is technically the arity, A-R-I-T-Y, of that function. And the arity of a function is the number of arguments that it expects to receive. So I'm going to make that check real quick. I'm going to say if args.length is greater than or equal to function.length, if I could spell length correctly, and if that's the case, then I am going to return this function call. Okay, that's fine. That's great. That gives us the end scenario. It's not going to work right just yet. See, there's problems here. This add5 is not a function still. So add5 comes from curry add, which took in a parameter and is supposed to return a function. Well, right now, curry add, which is an instance of this function definition, is not returning a function. The only thing it ever possibly returns is the final result. But I know that I need this here because I want to check the total number of arguments against the original function. All right, so let's look at the else statement then. Inside of the else statement, if we don't have enough arguments yet, what should we do? We should probably return another function. And since we are going to return another function, that will mean add5 will be a function. And okay, this is better. We're getting undefined, but we're making progress. Once we are returning that function, we can make it do something. So what should it do? Well, that function is going to continue taking new arguments, most likely one argument at a time. So we could take this and we could do something like var new args equals an array. We'll concatenate the original args from up above, and then we will push the new argument into that. All right, that's actually push is going to return an index. Okay, I can't do that. We'll start with dot concat, and then we'll say new args dot push a. Don't really like this code, but I think this might work. So what I'm doing is saying back here, when I call curry add and pass in this one parameter, that is this function definition right here. That is the function with an a parameter. All right, so now that I have executed that function as curry add, it's going to take the 5 value and apply it to any previous parameters that we may have passed in to this curry function, which in this case is not going to be any, not yet at least. And it's going to create a new array, concatenate any args that we previously had, and then push that into it. All right, so now we can return what? I need to rerun this whole process again. So some recursion would be nice, in which case I want to call this function curried, and I will say return curried, and I will apply curried with the new args. All right, save this, and a is not defined. Okay, why is a not defined? Oh, because I changed the way things are happening here. All right, so we'll call apply, and we'll pass in args. Save that. And look, there we have our actual result. This is looking promising. This is looking like more like a real curry function at this point. I've got 11, 12, and 13 as I expect based on the input of starting with add 5, 5 plus 6, 5 plus 7, 5 plus 8. So hey, I think we have a legit curry function. Now, one of the things that I've seen in other curry functions, though, is the ability to say something like curry add 5 comma or 6 comma 10. So if I console.log curry add 6 comma 10, well, my expectation based on libraries that I've seen is that this would go ahead and apply both of the parameters to the original add function and produce the result of 16. Let's save this and hey, look at that. It actually is working. That's honestly kind of amazing. I didn't expect that to work. I expected it to fail, and I thought I was going to have to change up this code a little bit, which frankly, I think I can change up quite a bit. There's a lot of code here that is kind of ugly. It works clearly. I've got my test cases, at least some very simple test cases here, but I want to try and clean this up a bit. Specifically, I want to use some of the new ES6 features. Like instead of dealing with array prototype slice, I'm just going to do args. This is the rest params feature of ES6. So I'm going to save that, and it still works. That's good. So instead of function apply, I'm going to also do the spread operator, which looks just like the rest params, except it's being applied to a function invocation. So that's the core difference there, rest versus spread. I'll save that, and again, it still works. That's definitely good. All right, so now these new args. This gets kind of ugly. I don't really like this. What I could do is say var new args equals, we'll use the spread operator again. We'll do spread args into this array and then pass in the new parameter. Save that, and again, everything still works. That's good. We're making progress. All right, so now, again, I can change this to the spread operator. And I can pass that in as new args, and good, it's still working. I am applying this array, spreading this array across this function, and then reconsolidating it here, which is a little funky. I'm not entirely sure I like that, but it's still working. Now that I have this reduced, though, I can really reduce the code just by doing both the spread and concatenation, or I'm sorry, spread and rest params all at the same time. Well, no, this is really spread twice, isn't it? Because this is the rest params. And so I'm going to spread this array into the new array, and then spread the final array into the arguments, and then use the rest params to recollect those arguments. All right, save that, and looks like it's still working. This is honestly kind of amazing. I'm quite happy with the direction this is going. Now, we could take this down to, a real infinite length. We could even change this over to Es6 Arrow Functions as an example. So I could say a module exports this, and instead of having these wrapper these wrapper curly braces, I could just return directly, just say function curried, have that returned. Unexpected token. Okay, that's not quite going to work the way I wanted. Okay, maybe I do need those in there still, but I bet I could change this into an ES6 arrow function. Oh no, I need to name that function, and you can only name a function like that. All right, so that's fine. I'm not going to bother going down that rabbit trail any further. This appears to be working pretty darn well at this point. So there we have, in 11 lines of code, we have our very own curry function, and hopefully we understand what it's doing at this point as well. That's really the most important thing here, is understanding what it's doing. So we have this add function that has two parameters. We call curry on the add function. That is going to call curry here, and it's going to return a new function called curried, and that new function is going to take an array of arguments. Once we pass in another argument, we're going to check, do we have, let's see, so we passed in the number 5, and the number 5 is being put into an array using the rest_params operator. Now that we have that 5 in an array, does the number of arguments that we have, is that greater than or equal to the number of arguments that the function expects? Well, no, that it's only one argument, and our add function expects 2 arguments. Well, since that's the case, we're going to return yet another function that takes a single parameter. And that function, when executed, in this case as add5, passing in the parameter 6, when that is executed, we're going to take the number 6, we're going to create our array with the previous arguments that we had, and then append the number 6 into it, spread that across the call to curried again, and that gives us a total of 2 arguments. That gives us the first argument 5 and the second argument 6 that we passed in to this function. Well, now that we have 2 arguments, the argument length is equal to the function length. Well, great. Okay, we have all the arguments we need. Let's go ahead and apply these arguments to the function and give the final result of the original function call, which ultimately produces 11, 12, 13, and then 16, as we've been seeing on our console. So there we have it, a quick, hopefully fairly easy and understandable way to implement your own curry feature in JavaScript. Now, I personally found this exercise to be incredibly enlightening. I love understanding how these things are built and how these things work. Now, I'm not saying that I would use this curry function in real production code. I'm probably not going to open source it. I mean, maybe I'll put it up on a gist and you can go grab it from GitHub. But if I were going to do this in production, I'd probably go grab a real functional JavaScript library like Ramda, because there's probably going to be some edge cases. There's going to be things that I didn't know about, things that I didn't catch inside of this curry function, because my test cases were frankly pretty darn simple. Either way, understanding how these generic curry functions work is incredibly valuable. And now that I know how they work, I can use this a little more effectively inside of my code. Hopefully you can too. So thanks for watching, and happy JavaScripting.